Welcome to another edition of CHP Talks. We are here today with Richard Vander Vaart, and we're going to be talking about chaplaincy in our police force, in the Army, and in our prison system. So with that, Rod, do you want to give Richard an introduction?
Yes, we've only gotten in touch recently. Richard has joined our Justice Committee as we seek to create the best justice policies in the country through the Christian Heritage Party. But it's been a pleasure to get to know Richard, and we're thankful to have him on the program today. And here's a little bit about the man. He has been married to Carolyn for 33 and a half years. They were foster parents for over 15 years. And while serving as a ministry in various local churches, Richard would often volunteer as a chaplain for various police forces throughout southwestern Ontario. He has served on the executive of the Canadian Police Chaplain Association, and he's now retired from that role. He currently works with Redemption Prison Ministry as the Atlantic Region Prison Visiting Pastor. And he says when COVID-19 doesn't mess up those plans. That's a complication that has come up in the last year, so we're going to talk about that a bit. And Richard started with RPM about 2 years ago. He now marks Bible correspondence courses, writes letters to inmates, has phone contact with some, writes letters and offers community support to those who are seeking to reintegrate into community after prison. Richard is a father, a grandfather, an author, a preacher, and in his free time, he loves writing letters. So, Richard, it's great to have you with us today on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've watched a number of these podcasts, so it's kind of fun to be able to speak with you gentlemen and actually get a response, right? Yeah. Rather than just it being one side, me listening. So Nice to see you.
Very good.
All right. Great to hear. So in terms of chaplaincy, there's these areas, and just wanted to sort of preface the conversation by saying so much of what the government's unique role is in our culture, in our country, is to provide police services, a standing army, and to protect us from harm from outside, harm from inside, in terms of the army and the police force. And then also to deal correctly with those who have broken the laws and are now incarcerated. And yet we hear so little of these issues in the day-to-day news. You'd think that the government was only a part of the economy from listening to the news on the day-to-day basis, right? And so let's take a step back and think about what the government does and how the Army and the police force particularly are involved in that and what their needs are in terms of chaplaincy. So Richard, with all that, do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Probably the easiest way to jump in is recognizing the military has had a history of chaplaincy. You have padres that serve, and that has been required for a long time. So the government does actively make sure that there are chaplains available for their soldiers. Our son-in-law has recently joined the military, and he speaks very highly of one padre in particular, who is a great source of encouragement as he comes in as a Christian young man, seeking to serve God in this capacity, seeking to serve his country, and does so with great zeal. And then you come into a situation where, you're far from home, far from family, with training that you do. They're working on stretching you, right? What are the boundaries of you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all these different things, and what kind of resilience do you have? So a chaplain is critical, not only at that point, early on in the training, but throughout the career of those who are involved in the military. And I'm really proud of the fact that our government continues to acknowledge the need of that. From that, I had the opportunity, I was not ever a military chaplain, but a number of police officers have served in the military. So when I volunteered as a police chaplain in Chatham, Kent, Ontario, the people who had been involved in military right away identified, oh, good, there's a chaplain here. And they knew there was particular times and particular functions. And if they needed, they could contact a chaplain. And in fact, there was 12. So there were 12 chaplains for this particular police force. And that way that police force was broken into 4 big regions. And there was always a chaplain on service in one of those regions 24/7. So, yeah.
So that's a significant commitment for you as a chaplain in that capacity. There would have been night shifts and those sorts of difficult times where someone comes in off of a long shift and just needs to unload.
And so the way that the chaplains worked is we were volunteers that were on call. The officer who was in charge, the staff sergeant, whoever was in charge at that point, could call in a chaplain if there was something significant that had taken place. I recall an instance where there was a particularly terrible car accident where 2 young boys had died. And so I was called out in the night to be there and to speak with the officers if they chose. So a lot of what chaplains do, the expression that we use as chaplains is we loiter with intent. And so we loiter with the intent to help, and to be a blessing to those who may be in need. And sometimes it's not at the moment because there are systems in place in local police forces, in the RCMP, the OPP, different police forces that have all those, acronyms. But it can be the time afterwards when all the official briefings and debriefings have been done and an officer still finds that things aren't sitting quite right. Then there's somebody that you can speak to who is there to be a friendly presence. And that is the role, because many of the people who serve are those who have skills as pastors, having been ministers for a number of years. Or we do have some secular chaplains as well, which sounds very interesting when you think of it, but there are actually humanist chaplains and things. The skills that they have, that they bring is years of training. I believe God gives us skills to know how to help people, just as there are doctors who can fix a broken arm. Whether or not they're Christians, they have that gift and skill to be able to set that. I do believe Christian chaplains, of course, know who the great physician is, and therefore serve under his authority with the awareness, these are our limitations and these are where we can help. And, the main thing that we can do is bring you to Christ. Having said that, there's always a caution too about proselytizing. Can we share our faith in things? And the short answer is yes. If an officer asks me, why do you serve in this capacity? Or we see a lot of horrible things, you hear a lot of horrible things. How do you manage this? And my response will always be, because of the work of Jesus Christ. I know that evil will always be addressed, and it has been at the cross, or it will be at the end of time when Christ returns as a just judge. And all who believe in him will bend the knee and will worship him. And those who don't will still bend the knee, and acknowledge who he is, and then face judgment for their unbelief. But that gives me tremendous hope when you walk through really difficult situations. And it's that sense of hope that you hope can be caught by the people who are with you and listening.
Well, very good. Yeah, that's a great encouragement to know that that's out there for our police officers. I think many of us will hear stories of PTSD from our veterans, obviously, and also in the police force. And my instinct would be that if more of them had been more in contact with chaplaincy, perhaps there'd be less PTSD. But am I going too far with that? Is that too much of a hope to ask for?
I would be biased and say, of course. Right. But the fact of the matter is, there's so much in the culture of the military. There's so much in the culture of policing that has to be private and confidential. And so even when you debrief, you want to be very careful for the people who were involved and the circumstances that they faced and the pains so sometimes it feels like even if I share the things that have gone on, there's really something that I have to limit. Or when I go home, my spouse says, "How was your day?" Well, I don't want to begin by saying it was horrific. I was at, and then you just fill in the blanks of all the terrible things that an officer may see, right? So there's always that disconnect from some of the strongest support that you could have. So if there are chaplains who are well placed, and if a rapport has been built, certainly some of this stress can be alleviated. The other thing is, there really is a camaraderie among those who are in military and those who are in the police force. And it's very hard to have someone break in. Ironically, if you and your partner at a policing event have both been at a shooting and one experiences trauma and the other doesn't, the one who experiences trauma is not necessarily going to speak to his or her partner and saying, "I'm losing sleep over this. I can't eat. I'm having nightmares," because their partner will go, when we encounter something again, is he going to be okay? Yes or no? Right. So where do you talk? And that's where a chaplain can come in and go, you were in an absolutely abnormal situation. Your responses are normal. Your mind is saying, this was a terrible thing to see. This is something nobody should experience. But you have to go in there, keep people safe, supervise the situation, guard other civilians. And when all of that is done, then as you begin to decompress, how do you do that? And there are things. God has made us fearfully and wonderfully, as Psalm 139 says. We really are fearfully and wonderfully made. There are things that we shouldn't have to recover from that we can, because God supervises us. If we have that awareness, bringing that to others. One of the questions sometimes for me to get an officer to speak, because some of them are assigned. They're assigned to have a chaplain and they resent it. And I don't care. But I can pretty much talk to anyone, and I'm happy with the thoughts in my own head, so you don't have to say much. But one of the things that will make an officer speak, I will say, what's the worst thing, the most evil thing you have ever seen? And many of them will immediately answer, and they'll tell and describe something terrible. And then I say, how do you unsee that? And for a lot of them, they say, I can't. I said, well, that's the role of a chaplain. That's the role of a caregiver. Because I understand there's one who is greater even than evil, who's one even stronger than the worst things that we can see. And he is mighty, mighty to save. And at that point, we'll have a conversation, whether or not that person is a believer. I can say from my experience, because I've heard a lot of things, why do I not have sleepless nights? Because PTSD can be, you can get it secondary, tertiary, having heard some of those stories. And the way that is debriefed for me is I bring it to the throne of grace, and I understand that Christ is in charge and that he has built us for community to be able to speak things through, so it moves from the trauma center of our brain to that part that becomes our history and part of our story of how we have found resilience. And God in his grace allows Christians as well as non-Christians to come to that place. He has made us in his beautiful grace so that we can find healing. Do
you think that most of the police officers who are serving today were adequately prepared for some of the things that they would see? In other words, they go into the force, they're going to be the knight in shining armor, rescuing people, saving people's lives, and so on. And we thank God for them, all those who, they know they're going to be making sacrifices. But I guess I wonder if they have any idea what they're going to have to deal with emotionally.
Well, I think in some ways, all you can say is thankfully not. Because then who would be equal for this? There really is a sense that there are people who, maybe by their own giftings or skills, I think for those who are Christians, they're aware that they have a sense that I can help people, and that strong sense is a God calling. However you come into this, I do believe that God prepares, equips, gives experiences, and gives the resources that are needful. You could stand with a broken arm and say, yeah, I have a broken arm, something needs to be done, and never go to the hospital. It will heal and may be protruding pretty badly, but you'll function somewhat. Or you can go, you know what, this arm needs to be fixed, and there are people who have the ability to do that. So as you go into something and as you begin to encounter increasing levels of difficulty or challenge or trauma, do you find the resources that are there? And some of the officers with the best resilience are the ones who are making the best use of the resources. There are social workers, there are counselors, there are trauma counselors, there are doctors, there are chaplains. There's a wide array, of people that are there to help. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's that's the policing side of it. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say about military or police chaplaincy, but let's move to the other side of the equation, and that's the people who have been caught by the police and gone through the court system and are now incarcerated, and the chaplaincy that they need in a very different environment and set of circumstances.
Well, the privilege that I have of being able to go in, I have a security clearance that's fairly high. My background gets investigated, who I am, what I do, all those different things. And so I have a fairly high security clearance that allows me to go into the prisons, that recognizes I have both training and clearance, and I have instruction from Corrections Canada so that I know what I'm allowed to do and not allowed to do, how I'm allowed to communicate, how I'm not. And then the goal is for those who are incarcerated, the goal is to give them the opportunity to be cared for, because there's an element of punishment, but there's also has to be a view that at some point these men and women will wind up back in community. How do we prepare? And so part of my role is to let the folks who I meet with know that there's a caring community, there's a praying community. There are resources when you come out, and one of the roles that I carry is very much a spiritual resource. The big question is, can God forgive me, for what I have done? And that's a really critical question. If you go hard and cold on that and you feel that's never going to be forgiven, then there is no point in clearing my moral backlog, so to speak. I'm going to be, for a lack of a better word, damned anyways. You know what I mean? That I'm carefully using that word. Then just go ahead and do what you want. But for those who find their conscience awakening, and I found that a few times in prison, that you will encounter men and women who are for the first time noticing their conscience is awakening. They had not really operated with one before, which makes sense scripturally, right? Because when it says in Galatians 2, I didn't know what sin was until you're presented with the law, and then you understand, oh, okay, this is coveting. Romans does it. So when you understand that, then you go, of course, one of two things will happen. Your conscience awakens, and you have to deal with it, or you have to deaden your conscience. So the ones who come to chapel are often ones who are curious. What does this mean? Who is God? What are the possibilities? And so then you begin to have conversations. Yeah.
So you've been involved in prison chaplaincy, and you can go into the prisons, and obviously it's not the same system where a chaplain is assigned in the way that they're assigned to a police force. Is it only by voluntary association that an inmate would come and talk to you?
So with Redemption Prison Ministry, we have a Bible study correspondence course that goes right from the basics of Christianity, and then allows you to do pretty in-depth work on particular books of the Bible or topics. And so those who are involved or enrolled, those are the ones that I would be able to meet and see and say, these people are taking this Bible correspondence course. I am in this region specifically to meet with them and encourage them. And so that would be, for me, the base. And there are a few other ministries and organizations that do the same thing, that have particular Bible study materials, and then they will meet with those who are reading or using those. There are volunteers that come from churches as well, and they get to apply and say, listen, we've known a member of our church who has come to prison. All of a sudden, we're aware of the fact there's a lot of people who are incarcerated. We'd like to sing. We'd like to bring a gospel story. We'd like to. And so there are opportunities for that. The prison system in the area here has chaplains that are placed in the prison system. Some of them are Christian chaplains, and then they have a variety of chaplains from other faiths or other belief systems. And they will be provided so that the prison population has the opportunity to have their faith or their belief or their understanding of the world represented, and that they have caregivers. Yeah.
Interesting. So when you're saying that various religions, like what would you be talking, like 10 or 15 chaplains of just a wide variety of beliefs that we may have only heard of, let alone understood anything about? Or?
Well, some of the chaplains are able to supervise or to assist people of different faiths. For example, the role of a Christian chaplain may be to provide somebody who is of the Muslim faith to make sure that they have the dietary requirements that are necessary, and the chaplain can advocate. So you have a Christian chaplain advocating for a Muslim inmate. There are imams that do come who are hired by the prison system to be present, but there are some chaplains who are generalists in the sense that they could preside at a Wiccan festival, which is a witchcraft understanding of the world, and they could speak. And so there are pagan meetings that can take place. So there's a variety of things. You know, it really for me was quite an eye opener as well when I came in. But again, our prison population represents all the people who are out and about. So.
Well, we're thankful for you, Richard, and the others who represent the gospel of light. I have a couple of friends who many years ago came to the Lord in prison. I have never asked them what role a chaplain may have played in that decision, but you know, two of my friends particularly that were saved out of a life of drugs and decided it would be a lot better to serve the living God, and they Amen. You know, had their sins forgiven and came out and have been living Christian lives ever since. Also, in recent years, some of our friends who are living Christian lives on the outside have ended up inside, for instance, you know, at abortion clinics and so on. Linda Gibbons, yeah. Mary Wagner, you know, we think were put in prison unjustly, but nevertheless, they also found opportunity to serve the Lord within the walls and to minister to other prisoners. So it's interesting to think of that whole life, the culture and unseen life of the spirit that might be going on behind those gray walls. You see a lot of it.
Absolutely. And I had become really discouraged probably 2 weeks ago, because it's been a year since I've been allowed to go in prison. I remember the last day that I was there was in March, probably the 13th of March. And there was the possibility that I had been exposed to COVID. So already before the actual lockdown began, I had to self-isolate. And so I was learning what self-isolating meant. And, you know, fortunately I wasn't exposed and I didn't have any of those things. So already prior to the first lockdown, I was locked down already. So it was a huge adjustment. And I was discouraged a few weeks ago because I was thinking, well, Lord, it's been more than a year. You know, like I have such a passion to be able to go in. And what difference is it making? You know, you're writing letters and doing different things. Well, I attended a chapel. I was leading a chapel service at a men's recovery center here in Moncton. And it's called Harvest House, a wonderful organization, wonderful ministry. And that man in the chapel there recognized me. I got this bear hug from this man. And he said, "You may not remember me." And I remembered him very well, but because of confidentiality, I can't say anything unless he acknowledges me. So he acknowledged me and he said, "You are the chaplain that showed me that God is real. And you gave me the desire to seek him out." Wow. And he was a man who had tremendous anxiety, and the peace of Christ had taken hold of him. And I was so privileged and honored that he felt that he wanted to share that. And I said, "God, thank you for that moment, that you recognize the seeds that get planted sometimes a year ago, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years later. God's in charge of the germination. We're responsible wherever we can to serve however we can, and that he will bring the results. Yeah.
Oh, that's a heartwarming story. One of the things that we just talked about briefly before the call was the need. As you said, you haven't been inside of a prison in a long time, but the prisoners who are there haven't had you there in person. And so that's their loss. That's something that, and for probably many prisons across the country and many chaplains, they haven't had that connection that's so vital for prisoners, and obviously for yourself to be able to do what you are called to do, what you're passionate about, and beyond. I guess, do you want to comment on that a little bit?
I do. I think one of the things that's absolutely critical for us as church to do right now is to be praying, systematically praying for our prisoners. You can go online and you can find out the names of the prisons in your area, and pray for whoever's serving as chaplain, whether they're employed by the prison system or volunteers. Very few chaplains that are volunteers are getting in. The paid chaplains, thankfully, are able to get in right now. But because there's so few volunteers going in, they're stretched so thin, so pray with thanks for the chaplains who are paid, who are present. Pray for the inmates who have lost family contact in this time. Families have not been able to visit at the height of the COVID times and things, so they've been cut off. The lockdowns have increased significantly for fear of transmission. So where there would be time in the yards, times for showers, times to go for meals, times to go for programming, those have been reduced, so that many prisoners are spending many hours more than usual locked into their cells. That's one of the consequences of the whole COVID crisis that I don't think many people are aware of. Pray for those who are officers, because the officers have to deal with prisoners who are behind closed doors more than usual, more than quote unquote normal, because there's supposed to be training and programs. So the officers have to deal with prisoners who are under stress, and the administration that's trying to keep up with the government requirements so that COVID doesn't spread. And the officers are the ones who are wedged right in the middle. And there are some Christian men and women who are just so godly and who are stretched so thin, and we need to pray that as they communicate the love of Christ. And for opportunities, if you know somebody who is incarcerated and you might be afraid, go to the website, the Correction Canada website, and you can find that. How do you write an inmate? You can find the addresses, you can find the things you're allowed to say, not allowed to say, what you're allowed to send in and not. And even writing 3 lines of encouragement. I know one of the men who was paroled last year, just before COVID hit, we sat down and we had a coffee. And I said, sometimes it's discouraging. I don't know exactly what to write for a letter. And he stopped me and he said, Richard, letters are gold. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, when you handwrite a letter, even if it's 2 or 3 lines, somebody from the outside was thinking about you. And he said, some of the people who I've been in prison with have broken ties with their family have abandoned them. For you to get a personal letter is gold. That was the word that he kept using, and that always stays in my heart and mind. That's like gold in prison. And I think, boy, what a blessing we can be as church and as followers of Christ. Even if you don't know somebody, for them to have a handwritten letter, means the world. If you don't know them well, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a reminder that probably not many of us have even thought about before. There's prisons out there, there's officers out there, there's army out there, and we hear about things about them from time to time in the news, but the idea of actually participating in some way in the relief, praying for those in prison, writing letters to those in prison, praying for the guards, praying for the officers, those are hopefully that has inspired some of you who are listening to perhaps do more. Maybe you're young and you're looking for a way to serve your country, serve God and your country in a unique way. And maybe some of these things will really speak to your heart. But thank you, Richard, for really opening our eyes and talking about all these matters. And is there anything that you want to say in closing?
It really is the most powerful weapon God gives us, and that is the weapon of prayer. If you say, I don't know any prisoners and I don't know any way of going in, then begin to pray for the institutions by name. Look them up online, find out, who might be the supervisors or wardens, and pray. And God will use that for blessing, because he said that he will work through the prayers of his people. He invited us to pray. Jesus teaches us the Lord's Prayer. And what a huge blessing that will be. And Peter, thank you for the chance to talk with you. And Narad, this has been a great delight. Thank you.
Well, it's so great. And, Jesus also said in parables, you were sick, or I was sick and in prison, and you came and visited me. And I think, that we might skip over the in prison part once in a while, but you're not skipping over that. You and the other chaplains and other volunteers who are going in to minister when possible to the prisoners, and because those are human beings for whom Christ died, and who need a ray of sunshine to carry them through to where they can get back to being functional members of the community. So Richard, thank you for doing that, and thank you for being with us today.
Shalom to you, brothers.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening, and I hope that you've learned something this day from our CHP talks, and we hope that you'll join us again next time. God bless you.